Let's begin with the foundations. Welcome to another lecture. I am Professor Alexei, and today we examine Cape Verde, or officially Cabo Verde, a compact archipelagic state set in the mid-Atlantic that, as it were, punches above its demographic and geographic weight in history, governance, and science.
Hi everyone, I'm Priyanka. I'll be asking questions along the way, kind of like your classmate in the front row, trying to make sure we connect the dots between the maps, the history, and the present day.
To frame our discussion, we define terms. Cape Verde is an archipelago, that is to say, a group of islands, situated roughly between 14 and 18 degrees north and 22 to 26 degrees west, several hundred kilometers off Senegal's Cape Verde. It belongs to Macaronesia, a North Atlantic biogeographic set that also includes the Azores, Madeira, the Savage Isles, and the Canaries. And these island chains share volcanic origins, and in wetter pockets, remnants of laurel-type forests. The 10 main islands form two groups, Barlavento, windward, and Sotavento, leeward, mirroring how the northeasterly trades sculpt rainfall and vegetation. Geologically, the islands are volcanic. Fogo remains the locus of historical activity, with Pico do Fogo rising to about 2,829 meters within an 8-kilometer caldera.
Maybe in simpler terms, think windward islands catching a little more moisture, leeward a little drier. And when we say Creole, we mean a stable language born from mixing. In this case, Cape Verdean Creole grew from Portuguese and West African languages, and people speak it every day, while Portuguese is the formal language in schools and government.
Moving forward, it is crucial to understand why this matters now. Cabo Verde has cultivated a reputation for democratic robustness and the rule of law that is arguably among the strongest in Africa. Indices from VDEM and others consistently reflect this. It maintains a special partnership with the European Union, and its currency, the escudo, is pegged to the euro, which stabilizes prices and expectations in a very open, service-oriented economy. Public health achievements are notable. In early 2024, the World Health Organization certified the country malaria-free. In security, its mid-Atlantic location demands maritime vigilance, including cooperation against trafficking. Environmentally, the islands sit near the nursery of the Atlantic's largest hurricanes, yet paradoxically, rarely experience direct landfalls. These intersecting themes, governance, health, climate, and security, give the archipelago outsized relevance relative to its small footprint.
And isn't it interesting how the phrase Cape Verde hurricane sounds like the islands get slammed every year? But since records began in the mid-1800s, there have been just 2 island strikes. It's a good reminder that where storms are born is not the same as where they typically go.
Let's start with the history. The islands were uninhabited when European navigators encountered them around 1456. Portuguese records often credit Antonio de Noli with Diogo Gomes, Alvise Cadamosto, Diogo Dias, and Diogo Afonso in the exploratory constellation. In 1462, the Portuguese established Ribeira Grande on Santiago, now Cidade Velha, the first permanent European settlement in the tropics. By the 16th century, the archipelago sat squarely in the transatlantic slave economy, which brought wealth and, predictably, predators. Francis Drake sacked Ribeira Grande twice in 1585, and a French attack in 1712 further exposed vulnerabilities. Administrative gravity shifted, and Praia became the capital in 1770. In the 19th century, Mindelo's Porto Grande blossomed as a coaling and communications node, an Atlantic switching station of sorts for the steam and cable eras.
So yeah, moving on. After that arc, from slave trade to steam, we see modern nationhood. Independence in 1975 followed the Carnation Revolution in Portugal, which changed the pathway to decolonization.
Correct. Independence was formalized in July 1975 after a transitional process and elections in June. Since the early 1990s, competitive multi-party politics have seen peaceful alternations of power. Linguistically, Portuguese remains official. Cape Verdean Creole, spoken by the vast majority, is a national marker with Barlavento and Sotavento variants and growing standardization efforts. The state requested in 2013 that the world adopt the Portuguese form, Cabo Verde, in official use. Everyday English still often says Cape Verde. Economically, services dominate. Resources are sparse, water is scarce, and less than 2% of land is arable. The diaspora, larger than the resident population, sends remittances and circulates skills and culture between New England, Lisbon, Rotterdam, and the islands. The escudo's euro peg underpins macro stability. Environmentally, temperatures hover around 22 degrees Celsius in February and 27 degrees Celsius in September. Rain is brief and irregular, mostly August to October, with orographic lift greening some windward slopes. Geologically, Fogo erupted in 2014-2015, impacting Chadas Caldeiras communities. In cyclone lore, Hurricane Fred struck in 2015, one of only two recorded island hurricane landfalls since 1851.
I'm curious about the name choice in daily life. Do people get corrected for saying Cape Verde instead of Cabo Verde? And also, is there an easy way to remember Barlavento versus Sotavento?
Well, usage is gently normative rather than punitive. Officialdom prefers Cabo Verde, but everyday language adapts at its own tempo. As a mnemonic, we can infer, Barlavento faces the wind, like the open palm to the breeze. Sotavento rests in the lee, like a book in the wind's shadow. Not strictly scientific, but serviceable for memory. Before we get to the complexities, a brief personal note. As a mathematician who moonlights in comparative institutions, I find Cabo Verde's governance equilibrium, semi-presidential balance, disciplined monetary anchor, and civil liberties an elegant proof by construction. And naturally, Fogo's cone in a caldera is a textbook exercise in nested structures, beauty edged by risk. Let's proceed to the next point. 3 questions that illuminate open edges. First, a historical puzzle. Were the islands truly uninhabited before the Portuguese? Second, a counterfactual. What if Pico do Fogo's 2014 event had escalated into a caldera collapse catastrophe? Third, a contemporary uncertainty. How resilient is Cabo Verde's service and tourism model in a world of climate variability and external shocks? Historical question 1. The written record from the mid-15th century characterizes the islands as uninhabited at first landing. Oral histories sometimes suggest earlier transient visits by African or Arab fishermen, and from time to time we see speculative nods to Phoenician or Moorish contact. Yet archaeologically we have no verified material culture, no habitation layers, no middens, no durable artifacts that would indicate permanent pre-Portuguese settlement. In simpler terms, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, but in this context, it aligns with navigational patterns and the island's water constraints. If visitors came, they likely did not stay. Even the discovery narrative is contested among European navigators. The prudent stance is shared credit across several voyages, refining charts over several years.
Can we say that the archaeological threshold would be things like hearths, pottery shards, fish bones in quantity, or even pollen changes? And maybe, would coastal erosion hide such traces? Or would we still expect something inland?
It is worth noting that coastal processes can erase small camps, yet enduring settlement leaves layered signatures: ceramics, tool debris, faunal remains, charcoal, modified soils, preferably in stratified contexts. On these islands, systematic surveys have not produced such sequences for a pre-1460s community. Given the terrain, any hydrologically favorable interior valley would be a prime candidate. To date, the silence of the strata remains persuasive. Counterfactual question 2. Suppose the 2014-2015 eruption on Fogo had cascaded into a caldera collapse event, extremely rare but physically possible in volcanic systems. We would expect large-scale displacement from Fogo to other islands, rapid strain on inter-island transport, housing, and public services, and an urgent international response leveraging diaspora networks and Lusophone partners, notably Portugal and the EU framework. Agriculture on volcanic soils would be disrupted for years in the affected zone. Tourism narratives would shift from scenic resilience to hazard salience. Insurance costs would likely rise, and infrastructure restoration would become the central fiscal priority. Mindelo and Praia, as logistical hubs, would carry disproportionate coordination loads. The national economy, already sensitive to external shocks, would face a multi-year recovery with heightened debt and donor engagement.
What if we thought about it like this? Globally, would the economic impact be noticeable? Or is it more a human and regional logistic story, with, ripples through tourism and remittances?
Mathematically, relative to the world economy, the shock is small. The IMF estimated Cabo Verde's 2023 nominal GDP at around $2.6 billion. Yet scale is contextual. For residents and the diaspora, such an event would be defining, altering migration decisions, remittance flows, and investor risk perceptions. Air and sea corridors would adapt, tourism would contract before rebranding on recovery. The strategic lesson is preparedness, evacuation planning, land use in hazard zones, and fiscal buffers, translating geologic risk into manageable governance tasks. Present-day question 3. The economic model rests on services, especially tourism, good governance, and external partnerships. The euro peg reduces currency risk. The EU special partnership deepens technical and security cooperation. The diaspora supplies remittances, skills, and market links. Anti-trafficking cooperation, for instance, Operation Flying Launch from 2007 to 2010, evidences institutional capacity in a challenging maritime space. Development indicators, HDI around 0.668, low perceived corruption with a CPI score near the low 60s, strong democracy rankings, growing e-government, tell a coherent story of competence. The vulnerabilities are equally clear. Aridity limits agriculture. Climate variability brings drought. External shocks to travel hit GDP quickly, and a small domestic market constrains scale. Diversification into resilient services, renewable energy, fisheries management, and digital public goods is promising, but requires sustained investment, human capital, and regulatory clarity.
I think the next thing we should talk about is risk. Future shocks could be pandemics affecting travel, prolonged droughts, or even reputational issues from maritime smuggling routes reappearing. How do partnerships and the diaspora hedge those? And where do we still not know enough?
In this context, partnerships act as risk-sharing mechanisms. Technical support for surveillance and water management, mobility agreements that smooth labor flows, investment frameworks that lower financing costs. The diaspora hedges by diversifying household income geographically. Unknowns remain. How far can tourism pivot toward higher value, lower volume models? How quickly can renewable energy reduce import dependence? What is the optimal policy mix for nurturing exportable digital services from a small, well-governed base? These are empirical questions suited to careful, longitudinal evaluation.
That was helpful to think through, actually.
To summarize, Cabo Verde is a volcanic archipelago in Macaronesia. Portuguese official language, Creole national language, Euro-pegged currency, and institutions that outperform regional averages. We explored three questions: the likely absence of pre-Portuguese settlement despite occasional oral claims, the counterfactual of a catastrophic Fogo eruption and its governance implications, and the resilience of a service-centric economy under climate and external shocks. For comparative perspective, it is instructive to study its Macaronesian neighbors, similar geologies, different trajectories. This then completes our present analysis. Be well, and until next time.
Maybe that's something we can come back to later. I'd love to compare those islands. Thank you, Professor. And thanks everyone for listening.